Welcome back. We're on Art of Law, but I'm opening the show because Al knows nothing about this. So, Al, I'm opening your show because I think it'd be interesting to have your immediate reactions, opinions, thoughts, and whatever on this Omid Scobie shenanigans about did he or did he not know about these names, and did he or did he not provide these names in any kind of manuscript or whatever. I think you were on the show with me with Andy Signor on Popcorn Planet when we talked about these things. And I think we went through a bit of this interview. So we're going to remind viewers that may not have seen that about this. The long story short here is he said that he only edited the English book and he didn't put names in any other version of the book, choosing his words carefully. And so somehow that ended up in the Dutch copy of the book. Let me show this first, then we'll get your thoughts, Al. So this was the original interview after it all blew up.
You didn't want that to happen.
I had never submitted a book that had their names in it, so I can only talk about my version.
Yeah.
I'm obviously frustrated. I wouldn't say I'm upset about it, because, to be honest, I've been operating in a bubble of no emotion for the last 10 days.
Right, so that was the main thing. So his view, his stance was that he never put the names in any version of this book. Lo and behold, there is now an article by him in iNews, and I've snipped out the wording so that it's nice and clear for everybody. And he says, these are his words, word for word. To be clear, the only publisher I worked directly with was the one covering the US and the UK. I spent almost 2 months with independent British barristers and in-house legal counsel. I've already qualified that that's English and Welsh barristers, but by the by. And also that barristers are independent regardless of whether they're in-house or not. But that's another side story. No doubt Al's got tangents on that. To ensure that every detail in the finished book, so he's only talking about the finished book, was legally watertight. Unbeknownst to me at the time, early and uncleared text was provided to the Dutch publisher in order for them to start work on the translation, with the understanding that their translation would be updated to reflect the final version of the book I officially submitted. Al, your thoughts, please.
Well, a few thoughts. First of all, you predicted this, because I remember that you said, well, that does not rule out sending a manuscript. And a few people in the comments said, well, yes, you don't send the finished book off, do you? You send the manuscript and then they translate and produce a book. So technically, he was literally correct. Also, yeah, you're right about that. When I saw that, I went, there's no such thing as British barristers. There are barristers who are British, of course. And yes, we have to be independent. That's one of our core duties. We have to be independent of everybody, including our clients. There's some very interesting case law that we can discuss maybe on a future video of judges saying, can lawyers, especially barristers, please stand up to their clients and just like rein them in a little bit. But yeah, so the situation now is he's sort of, I've seen what he's saying. So it's technically not incompatible with what he said. He's just saying I sent an earlier revision of the manuscript. But the fact is that, the implication was I would never have named these people. And now he clearly has. So obviously it does hurt his credibility. In practice, though, as we said before, there's no legal comeback here. The Crown, the two people mentioned, who I won't mention, are definitely not going to sue. Because, the problem with suing for defamation is, you air all your dirty laundry in public, but more importantly, you open yourself up to what we now call disclosure, what our American friends call discovery, and indeed what we used to call discovery. And, that can be sort of like, worth being sued for to get access for that. Although, just to remind people, to get nerdy and technical, but that's kind of our thing, when you get disclosure in a case, there is a rule that you can only use that material for the actual case, unless you seek the permission of the court. But once the disclosure is in, it's effectively in the public domain. We don't have, the Americans have a thing called PACER, which is fantastic, where pretty much every court document is uploaded there electronically. And you can search for, witness statements, pleadings, submissions, anything like that. What's quite good as well is, although technically it's 10 cents a page, if you clock up less than $30 per quarter using it, they actually refund you. In fact, I've never actually been charged. They haven't even invoiced me for that, because they've got all this First Amendment sort of thing in the States, and access to official documents. So when Pacer came out and you had to pay normal commercial rates for it, people said, no, that can't be allowed, because it's a really strange thing. Anybody who gets public funding in America, sort of like universities, or NASA's an interesting one, if you get public funding, you have to make the material that you have produced freely available to the public. So that was a bit of a tangent, just to pad this out a bit and make it like slightly less obvious that I only know anything about this this case from watching Dan's other videos. But yeah, so that's the situation. It's very embarrassing for him. Does it cause him any legal problems? Does it make it any worse? Well, no, because, like I say, the two people concerned are not going to sue. And it'd be very interesting to see what this has done to book sales, because, a little bit of controversy never hurts. I mean, when they injuncted Spycatcher, I've read Spycatcher, and it's the most boring book in the world, because it's just a rewrite of Chapman Pincher's Their Trade is Treachery. Because he'd actually interviewed all the relevant people anyway, because he was like, the official biographer of the intelligence services. So, I don't think this is a deliberate, attempt at hyping the book or creating a fake controversy. I think he got caught out, and rather than just going, well, yeah, we submitted that, but the editorial choice was not to name, but that wasn't communicated properly to the Dutch publishers, I think people would have said, okay, fair enough. But it's the fact now he has been caught out in, let's be kind here and not get sued, an inconsistency. So it's embarrassing, and clearly it's keeping the story in the news. But realistically, has it hurt him? Because how many people now are sort of buying like the English version and the Dutch version just to compare?
Indeed, and I think the book sales are actually pretty poor from what I've read, compared to certainly his previous book. The thought that jumped out to me, in fact, it was too obvious that I didn't include it in my first video. I thought it didn't need to be said, but then having thought about it, I thought, actually, I will say it, and I said it in my other video over on Black Belt Secrets, is that when he said it was unbeknownst to him initially that these papers had been passed across, but on the condition that it was updated afterwards. Obviously, you can't know a thing without knowing the thing that it's connected to in the first place. So obviously, he wouldn't have known the condition of providing those papers in the first instance had he not known that they were provided in the first instance. So he must have found that out afterwards. So obviously, he now knows how and who and when and why, and he probably knows everything about how they were passed across. And importantly, very interestingly, I think, he now will know that they were passed across with the condition that it was updated. And I'm just word spinning here that must have been along the lines of, well, here's some notes or an early manuscript or an early version, but, make sure this isn't the final one. Make sure you do look at what we send you later on. Must have been the conversation from this paragraph that we've just read of his. Then surely that is a dint on the credibility of someone, any one or many someones in between. Maybe they've got something. They might take issue with him, his position on it, his initial denial, if you like, of writing these names down anyway. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, because this is the problem. This is the thing, and this crops up in like litigation all the time, where if you can catch somebody out in an untruth, and I'm not saying it's even a deliberate untruth, it completely undermines their credibility. Because even if you're not accusing somebody of deliberately lying, you can say, well, are you sure about that? Are you certain? Yes. Well, previously you were certain about this thing that you hadn't passed the names on, but you now know that's incorrect, don't you? Yes. So you can accept that, you do make mistakes. Well, I didn't make a mistake this time. But, well, yes, but at the time, and this is, like I say, a very common cross-examination question. Yes, but at the time you made the first mistake, did you think you made the mistake? Well, no, obviously I don't. I didn't realise. Yeah, that's the whole point. You don't, by definition, when you're wrong, you don't know you're wrong until somebody points it out. So might you be wrong again? And it's like, well, the classic answer is they can either agree with you, which is the only rational answer. Well, yeah, I suppose I could be wrong, or they could say, well, no, I'm definitely, I'm not wrong. I'm sure about this. And you just say to the judge or the jury afterwards, well, they are as certain about this thing as they were certain about the other thing that was demonstrably wrong. So, like I said, in litigation terms, which lawyers are always thinking, this is a very, it's a bad thing to do. I don't mean that bad morally bad. It's just it's bad for your reputation. But it's interesting you were saying about the book figures, because I didn't know what they were doing. But again, just to go off on a tangent, do you remember the Da Vinci Code book? Dan Brown. I really like Dan Brown stuff. I know people sort of criticise it, but it's interesting as well because they filmed a lot of the Da Vinci Code like just outside our chambers because we're just opposite Temple Church, and Temple Church are great about, hey, do you want to film anything here? We don't care. You can film a satanic ritual here. We just need the cash. And it was quite funny because what's his name? Tom Hanks was there, and he's really tall. I was really surprised. I don't know why. I wasn't expecting him to be that tall, but he's really, really tall. But what happened there, just to explain, Dan Brown wrote the Da Vinci Code. But years before, there was a book that we all loved called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, all about that conspiracy. But it was written as if it was true. So the people, well, two of the three people who'd written that book sued Dan Brown for copyright infringement. One of the writers didn't bother. He said, well, there's no point suing because loads of people are buying our book now on the back of this. Because within the Da Vinci Code, that book is actually referenced, and there's a character in the book that uses the name of the authors. And, like Dan Brown was saying, I was giving them full credit. I actually put their names in the book. And, it was quite funny, the cross-examination, because it was going, you do not just make all this up. It's not real. I just, and his research was fantastic, because they say, well, what do you do for research? He says, I don't research. My missus Googles things for me. And it said, and this isn't accurate, and this isn't accurate, and there's not this many windows in the Rosemary Chapel. And he's going, I know, it's all pretend. And it was a very interesting cross-examination. But you can't copyright a fact. So when they came forward and said, well, actually, because they said, well, we made all this up as well. And they said, yeah, but you published it as if it was a factual book. I saw this book, thought this would make a really good story. You can't come, and the judge said, you can't come after the fact and say, actually, everything we put forward as a non-fiction book, we ourselves had made up. And there's also this, there is no copyright in an idea. You can't copyright an idea. You can only copyright what's called the expression of the idea. So if you want to go and write your story about a young orphan who goes to wizarding school, so long as you keep it, the name's different, you can do that. But the one thing the judge pointed out, he said, I'm very curious about the funding here, because I noticed that your publishers are funding the litigation. And the publishers of the Da Vinci Code was Random House. And the publishers of Holy Blood and Holy Grail was Random House. And the judge actually in the middle of the trial said, I'd just like to see some sales figures here. And of course, the sales figures had shot up through the trial. And he was going to say, one doesn't like to be cynical about this. and he says, I am sure that the actual claimants genuinely think this is a dispute, but I can't help but think that the reason Random House have happily thrown all the money at the legal fees here is because both books just sold. I mean, Da Vinci Code sold a few more on the back of this, but Holy Blood and Holy Grail, suddenly they sold 10 times more books during the conduct of that trial than they'd actually sold in the previous sort of 25 years. So, controversy does not hurt book sales. Although, like you say, Dan, it's interesting that you're saying the sales haven't gone up. And it might just be that people are going, well, who cares? It's just not that interesting. It's one little bit of, scandal and gossip, but it's not like this is a massive revelation. We've seen before that this story about people in the palace sort of commenting on, what the baby would look like, which again, like the people have pointed out, I mean, that is a very common thing, oh, well, as long as he gets his mum's looks and his mum's brains, he'll be fine. So I didn't think there was anything untoward there. And people have been speculating about who it was. And as Scobie himself said, these names have been floating around amongst journalists since the story first came to light. And I think the reason that nobody's mentioned this, I don't think it's through fear of defamation. I just think they're going, it's a bit of a non-story, and also the sorts of people who write about the royals like having access to the royals, and you are not going to get invited to the next garden party if you sort of publish an article, about that, especially when it's pretty much, unsourced and unverified. So I think this is just a storm in a teacup. I know people are very, very interested in it. I think more people are interested in the actual mechanics of this story, the inconsistencies and who said what to whom and when, rather than the actual news itself, because I'm not even sure it particularly is news.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's certainly the angle I've taken with it, because it's something that everyone is interested in the sense that the names must have come from somewhere. How do they end up there? And it's the whole initial denial and that sort of thing. That I think that is the news, rather than the news bit of the news. Those are my thoughts on it. So yeah, there we go. I thought we'd just raise that up since you hadn't seen it, and get your thoughts on it. Please, I know I'm on your channel. I will do the shouting. Please make sure you subscribe to this channel. I was going to say we, because I feel part of this channel, because we sort of started it at the same time. But, please do subscribe. We are almost at 10,000 subscribers. Let's get over that threshold, please. I'll be posting this in my community page as well. You can pop over there and see my other videos there as well. Please do subscribe. Let's get over that 10,000 threshold. And we'll bid you a very lovely Saturday evening. It's 5:45 now, finishing recording. Al, have a lovely evening. Fantastic. And we'll do this again soon. Take care.
You take care, and thank you, everybody.